There is a version of financial success that looks nothing like what you've been told it looks like. It doesn't drive the car you'd expect, it doesn't live in the neighborhood you'd assume, it doesn't post the vacation, wear the watch, or upgrade the apartment every time the income goes up. From the outside, it can look like someone who hasn't quite arrived yet. And here's the thing, that appearance isn't accidental. For a lot of people, quietly building serious wealth, looking broke isn't a byproduct of their financial strategy, it is their financial strategy. Stay with me, because what I'm about to walk you through will completely change how you see the gap between what someone's financial life looks like and what it actually is. This isn't a lecture about minimalism, it's not a case for deprivation. It's a psychological explanation, backed by research, for why the people who decouple their identity from visible spending are doing something that most people's brains never allow them to do, and why that decoupling might be the most quietly powerful financial move available to anyone, regardless of income. Research from the National Bureau of Economic Research on consumption and wealth accumulation found that high earners who display visible status markers, the car, the home, the wardrobe that signals arrival, tend to accumulate significantly less net worth than high earners who don't. Not slightly less, significantly less. And the reason isn't discipline, it isn't willpower, it's something happening much deeper in the brain than either of those things. Your brain has been running a social comparison scan since before you could name it. Psychologist Leon Festinger's social comparison theory describes this as a baseline neurological tendency. Your brain continuously evaluates your own status by scanning the behavior of the people around you. For most of human history, that scan was essential. Social rank determined resource access. Being seen as lower status had real survival consequences. So your brain didn't evolve to ignore what other people have, it evolved to care intensely. The problem is that in a modern financial environment, acting on that scan costs money, compounding money, and most people never realize the scan is running at all. What follows are 10 patterns that show up consistently in people who are building wealth quietly. People who, from the outside, look like they haven't made it yet. Some of these patterns will feel like advantages, some will feel like burdens. Most are both at once. The first is that they drive cars that don't match their income. This one sounds obvious until you run the actual numbers. Research on vehicle expenditure and household wealth accumulation has found, across multiple studies, that transportation is one of the largest depreciating asset drains on middle-income households, and that people who consistently drive vehicles below their earning level accumulate measurably more investable wealth over equivalent periods. The gap isn't marginal. It compounds over years into a difference that restructures what retirement looks like. But the psychology here isn't about the car itself. Your brain doesn't just want a vehicle, it wants a vehicle that communicates something to the people watching. Economists call these positional goods purchases whose value comes not from what they do, but from what they signal relative to others. The commute experience of a 5-year-old sedan is functionally identical to the commute experience of a brand new one. The difference is the broadcast. And your brain, running its social comparison scan, is heavily invested in what gets broadcast. Not because you're shallow, because that's how the scan works. It assigns status value to visible signals, and then it generates discomfort when your signals fall below your reference group. That discomfort is the mechanism. It's the thing that makes the upgrade feel necessary when it isn't. And once you can see the mechanism, the car decision stops being about the car entirely. It becomes a question of who you're actually broadcasting to and whether that audience exists anywhere outside your own nervous system. The second pattern is that they wear the same things often enough that people notice. Research on what psychologists call the spotlight effect, developed at Cornell University and widely replicated since, found that people dramatically overestimate how much others notice and remember details about their appearance. In study after study, participants assumed their clothing choices were far more visible to others than they actually were. The mental inventory most people run, did I wear this last time I saw them, will they notice I'm repeating, corresponds to a level of scrutiny that simply isn't happening. Here's what nobody tells you about that phantom audience. It is one of the most expensive fictions your brain maintains, because the anxiety of being seen in the same outfit twice generates real purchasing behavior. It sends people back to stores they didn't need to visit, toward items that fill a social gap that wasn't actually open. The spotlight effect is a spending driver wearing the disguise of a social concern. There's a real cost to acknowledge here, though. In certain professional or high visibility contexts, appearance does carry weight. Wardrobe choices in some industries affect perception in ways that affect outcomes. The insight isn't that clothing never matters. It's that the vast majority of daily outfit anxiety is running on miscalibrated threat detection, and knowing that gives you the option for the first time to actually choose. The third pattern is that they find connection in low-cost or free spaces and don't apologize for it. Here's the thing about how money and social belonging get tangled in the brain. Your brain has a deep association between resource investment and relational value. If you spent money on a gathering, the brain files the experience as meaningful. If you didn't, there can be a low-level sense that you underinvested in the relationship. But research associated with the study of spending and subjective well-being, including work from the University of British Columbia on pro-social spending, consistently finds that the quality of social connection, not the setting or price of the activity, drives the emotional payoff of shared time. The expensive dinner doesn't produce better conversation. The conversation produces the conversation. The psychology behind social spending is this: your brain has conflated cost with care, and that conflation is expensive to maintain. People who've quietly separated those two things, who can suggest a walk instead of a restaurant and mean it without embarrassment, have disarmed one of the most consistent budget leaks there is. Not because they care less about the people they're with, because their brain has correctly identified where the actual value lives. This takes practice. And it occasionally creates friction. Some relationships are built around a certain level of consumption, and opting out of that consistently does carry a social cost. The skill isn't avoidance. It's knowing which expensive social contexts genuinely produce something that can't happen elsewhere, and treating the rest as optional. The fourth pattern is that they're genuinely unbothered by what their peers are buying, not performing unbothered, not white-knuckling through it, actually not feeling the pull. And here's where the neuroscience gets interesting, because this isn't a personality type, it's a brain state. Specifically, the result of what happens when someone's reference group shifts. Research on relative income and life satisfaction, including studies from the University of Warwick, found that financial satisfaction is more closely tied to how a person compares to their reference group than to their absolute financial position. Raise someone's income while also raising their reference group's income, and satisfaction barely moves. The implication runs in both directions. Change who you're comparing to, and the entire emotional landscape of your financial life shifts without a single dollar changing hands. This connects to one of the most robust findings in positive psychology, hedonic adaptation, the process by which people rapidly return to a baseline level of satisfaction after gains or losses. A status purchase produces a genuine dopamine response, and then the response fades, usually within weeks, while the financial cost persists. The brain adapts to the new normal and starts scanning again. People who look broke have often, consciously or not, stepped off that treadmill not through extraordinary self-control, but by changing what normal looks like in their reference environment. The real cost here is worth naming honestly. Stepping out of a consumption-driven social world can create distance. It can feel isolating. It can make you feel like you're watching from outside a conversation everyone else is having. That's real. It's not a reason to abandon the strategy, but it's a reason to be deliberate about which communities you're building. The fifth pattern is that they don't upgrade their living space every time their income improves. Housing is where lifestyle anchoring does some of its most expensive work. Loss aversion, one of the most replicated findings in behavioral economics, documented extensively by researchers including Kahneman and Tversky, describes the brain's tendency to experience losses as roughly twice as psychologically painful as equivalent gains feel pleasurable. Once your brain has established a certain kind of home as its baseline, a simpler or smaller space doesn't just feel modest. It feels like regression, like something was taken. But here's what nobody talks about when it comes to housing and identity. The anchor is arbitrary. The baseline your brain is defending was set by circumstance, not by any calculation of what you actually need to function well. Research from the Urban Institute and similar organizations tracking housing costs and household wealth formation has documented consistently that housing is the single largest driver of consumption growth as income rises, and that households which resist that upgrade pattern accumulate net worth at rates that diverge sharply from their peers within 5 to 10 years. That said, housing quality genuinely affects daily life. Rest, stress, the ability to recover between demanding days, these are real variables, not luxuries. This isn't an argument for misery in service of a number. It's an argument for distinguishing between the upgrade that makes your actual life better and the upgrade that satisfies the brain's loss aversion without changing anything that matters. The sixth pattern is that they're comfortable saying out loud that they don't spend money on something. Not "I can't afford it," which preserves social face by implying desire held back by circumstance. "I don't spend money on that." Full stop. No apology, no qualifier, no performance of wishing things were different. This sounds simple. Psychologically, it is one of the hardest things to do consistently. Research in consumer psychology, including work published in the Journal of Consumer Research on social identity and purchase behavior, has found that people frequently make purchases primarily to signal group membership or to avoid the discomfort of appearing to be outside a group. The spending isn't really about the thing, it's about the belonging. And "I don't spend money on that" announces, without softening, that your identity doesn't depend on that category of consumption. The psychology behind identity and spending is this: your brain uses purchases as social language. Every buying decision is partly a sentence in a conversation about who you are and where you belong. When someone opts out of a category entirely, without excuse, they're not just declining a purchase, they're declining a certain kind of social performance. And that can make people uncomfortable in ways that are hard to trace back to the thing itself. You're not antisocial for not wanting to spend. You're just running a different operating system, but this is also genuinely worth examining. In some professional and social contexts, opting out of certain consumption categories does carry real costs to perception, to relationships, to access. The skill is knowing which categories those are, and which ones only feel that way because the brain's belonging circuitry is sounding an alarm that isn't connected to any actual threat. The seventh pattern is that they experience more discomfort spending on status than on not spending. Not guilt, exactly. Something closer to incongruence, the feeling that a purchase doesn't fit, that it's slightly wrong, like a word used in the wrong context. And here's where the neuroscience becomes genuinely counterintuitive. That discomfort isn't a sign that something has gone wrong. It's a sign that something has been correctly calibrated. Research grounded in self-determination theory, developed by Detsy and Ryan and among the most replicated frameworks in psychology, finds that people whose actions consistently align with their internalized values report significantly higher well-being and lower anxiety than people whose actions are driven by external validation, regardless of outcomes. Your brain has a coherence monitoring function. It runs continuously, tracking whether what you're doing matches who you understand yourself to be. When it detects a mismatch, it produces discomfort. For most people, that mismatch triggers when they're not spending enough to keep up. For people who have built a different internal self-model, the mismatch runs in the other direction. Here's the thing about that discomfort. It's diagnostic, not decorative. It's telling you something about alignment. The challenge is that this can become its own form of rigidity. Someone who feels discomfort spending on anything, including things that would genuinely improve their quality of life, isn't thriving. They're trapped in a different kind of miscalibration. The goal isn't maximum aversion to spending. It's accurate self-knowledge about which purchases move you toward your own values and which ones move you toward someone else's. The eighth pattern is that they find a kind of status in being invisible about money. And here's something that behavioral economists have documented, but that most financial content never discusses. Conspicuous consumption, the visible display of wealth, through goods and experiences, peaks not at the top of the wealth distribution, but in the middle. As actual accumulated wealth increases, research on consumption patterns across income groups finds that spending often becomes less visible, not more. The most financially secure households disproportionately favor experiences, privacy, and quality over display. The loudest financial signaling tends to come from people who are most anxious about their position, not most secure in it. But here's what nobody tells you about that pattern. It requires something most people never build: a brain that has genuinely decoupled self-worth from external recognition, not as a philosophy, as an actual neurological state. That decoupling doesn't come from willpower. It tends to come from enough internal security that the brain stops treating status signaling as a survival behavior, and it produces something that looks from the outside like not caring. What it actually is freedom from a very expensive scan, not that invisibility is universally better than visibility. If you're in an environment where financial signaling affects professional outcomes, the calculation is different. The insight isn't that you should hide what you've built. It's that consciously choosing which kind of status you're performing and who you're performing it for is a decision most people never make deliberately. The people who look broke while building wealth made it deliberately. The ninth pattern is that they automate their wealth before their brain ever registers it as available to spend. Here's the thing about automation and why it changes everything. Your brain doesn't experience money, it never sees in a spending account as a loss. It adapts to the lower available balance and recalibrates what normal looks like. The adjustment is quiet. It happens without fanfare. And then wealth accumulates in the background while the brain continues optimizing for the smaller number it perceives as its baseline. This is the behavioral mechanism behind one of the most significant findings in retirement savings research. Economists Richard Thaler and Shlomo Benartzi documented in their Save More Tomorrow program research that automatic escalation of savings contributions produce dramatically higher savings rates than voluntary programs, without participants reporting any meaningful reduction in satisfaction or sense of deprivation. People who were saving more felt, month to month, essentially the same as people who were saving less, because they never saw what they were setting aside. Present bias, the brain's documented tendency to assign disproportionate weight to immediate rewards over future ones, even when that weighting contradicts the person's own stated preferences, is the reason this works. Your brain doesn't crave money it is never encountered in spendable form. Move it before the brain counts it, and the craving never activates. The result is a life that looks from the outside like someone living on less than they earn. Because they are. And they're barely aware of it. There is a calibration risk here worth acknowledging. Automating too aggressively, building so little margin into the month-to-month balance that any unexpected expense creates real stress, can produce its own form of financial anxiety. The right amount is the amount that accumulates meaningfully without making the daily financial life feel like a tightrope. The 10th pattern is that they treat their future self as someone they genuinely care about, not as an abstraction, not as a retirement planning exercise, as a real person, present in current decisions with preferences and needs that deserve actual consideration. Research from Stanford's Virtual Human Interaction Lab, led by Hal Hirschfield and colleagues, found that people who feel a stronger psychological connection to their future selves make significantly more patient, wealth-building financial decisions, not through greater discipline, but because the future self feels real enough to advocate for in the present. Your brain's default setting is to treat future you as a stranger. Temporal discounting, the well-documented neurological tendency to value immediate rewards over delayed ones in ways that consistently exceed rational preference, is the mechanism. The reward circuitry doesn't weight future you equally to present you. It assigns that person lower priority automatically, the way it would assign lower priority to anyone outside your immediate circle. People who are building wealth quietly have, through some combination of neurology, formative experience, or deliberate practice, made future self feel familiar, close, specific. And that familiarity changes what sacrifice feels like. It stops feeling like deprivation and starts feeling like loyalty. If that feels abstract to you, if future you doesn't show up vividly when you're making a financial decision, you're not broken. You're running the brain's default. The research suggests the connection can be strengthened deliberately through vivid visualization, through treating future plans as concrete rather than hypothetical, through building financial systems that your future self will benefit from without requiring your present self to feel the weight of every decision. The goal isn't to stop living now, it's to make sure now you and later you are actually in relationship with each other rather than strangers sharing a bank account. This pattern, more than most, comes with a real cost. Strong future self-orientation can make it genuinely difficult to be present. The person who is always building for later can miss now entirely the relationships, the experiences, the ordinary days that turn out to matter more in memory than they seem to at the time. The insight isn't to weaken the connection to future self. It's to build enough present self into the equation that the whole thing stays livable. Now here's what this list actually is. Underneath all 10 items, it's a description of what happens when someone's brain has, for whatever reason, decoupled self-worth from social display. And it's worth being honest about two things simultaneously. That decoupling is genuinely powerful, and it is genuinely costly. None of these 10 patterns are virtues. They are tendencies, some neurological, some shaped by experience, some built deliberately over time, that happen to align with long-term wealth accumulation in ways that our financial systems reward. But alignment with a long-term wealth building is not the same as a good life. And a list like this can sound, if you're not careful, like a case for joylessness dressed up in neuroscience. The social friction is real. The occasional loneliness of opting out of shared consumption is real. The difficulty of enjoying what you've built when enjoying it has been trained to feel like a threat is real. These are costs. They deserve to be named, not footnoted. And the person on the other side of this, the person who upgrades their space when they can afford to, who buys the thing that signals arrival because arrival is worth celebrating, who lives visibly and spends in alignment with a value system that says present joy matters as much as future security, that person is not doing it wrong. That is a fully coherent set of values. Present experience is real. The satisfaction of a life that looks like what you've worked for is legitimate. Neither of those truths is less true because this video exists. Research on income and subjective well-being, and the debate between findings associated with Kahneman and Deaton's earlier work and more recent research by Matthew Killingsworth has produced a genuinely unsettled picture. What has emerged clearly is this. The relationship between money and happiness is not linear, and the mechanism matters enormously. Spending that aligns with your actual values tends to produce more lasting satisfaction than spending that serves social performance. Experiences tend to outlast objects in memory, and security, real security, not the appearance of it, does produce a measurable floor of well-being that its absence denies. The real question isn't whether to look broke or look successful. The question is who your financial life is actually organized around. When your purchases are driven primarily by the social comparison scan, by the phantom audience, by the reference group, by the brain status signaling machinery, the answer is it's organized around a nervous system response, not a set of values. And that response is expensive. Reliably, compoundingly expensive. Looking broke for the people this video describes is a symptom of something simpler. They made a different choice about who their money is for. Not loudly, not as a philosophy they announce. Just quietly, in the repeated decisions no one else sees. And that choice, invisible, unglamorous, completely unpostable, might be the most underrated financial move available to anyone. If you're watching this and you recognize yourself in these patterns, if you felt the discomfort of a status purchase, the relief of not buying, the quiet satisfaction of a balance that's growing in the background, you're probably building something real. Just remember to actually let yourself have some of it. The future self you're protecting will be grateful for the preparation, but your present self is also real and deserves to be part of the equation. If these patterns feel foreign to you, if looking around at what others have still pulls hard, if future you feels like a stranger, if the automation feels impossible rather than automatic, you're not undisciplined, you're not bad with money. Your brain is running the default social comparison scan with full intensity the way most brains do. That's not a flaw. That's human. The question is whether any of the mechanisms described here could be built into your life as systems, quietly, without requiring a personality overhaul, so that the scan runs, but the wallet doesn't have to answer every time. If this changed how you're thinking about what financial success actually looks like, drop a comment and tell me which of these 10 patterns surprise you the most. And if you haven't subscribed yet, now's the time. This channel is created for educational and informational purposes only. It is not intended to replace professional psychological, medical, financial, or therapeutic advice. Always consult with a professional.